every single one of us had had a doctor who had either completely ignored our symptoms, told us, no, 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 none of that's possible from Botox, or like in the case of mine, she just said, oh, well, that's incredibly rare. And that's all she said to me. She had no advice on, what to do about it or how long is this going to last? How long am I going to be on my couch, unable to care for my young children and unable to work? And the reality is that no one knows the answers to these questions because there simply has never been long-term research done on iatrogenic botulism cases.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. A self-described crunchy mom decided to get the teeniest bit of Botox to diminish the lines around her eyes. What happened next was frightening and life-changing. This is episode 532, and our guest today is Megan McCue. Megan is a mom, a speech pathologist, and the author of Notox and Me Talks Pretty. After one treatment of Botox, Megan's life was turned upside down. She explains exactly what happened to her in this episode. How her doctor, for example, dismissed her concerns, and how incapacitated the Botox treatment led her to be. She had trouble swallowing, she had brain fog, dizziness, a host of symptoms that made it impossible for her to work. She talks today about why she's become an outspoken advocate, how she wants young people to avoid Botox, and everyone really to be aware of what is in it. She talks about the black box warnings that come with this product and the court cases that have arisen as it has affected people's nervous systems, their central nervous systems. You might think you're a person that would never try Botox. Well, let me just tell you, temptation is strong. So share this information with friends and family. This is the 5th and final episode in our young adult series this spring. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to become a member of Weston A. Price Foundation. Now is the time. It is our 25th anniversary of advocating for good health by looking to the past and alternatives to our conventional systems. If you have benefited from this podcast, just go to westonaprice.org, click on the Why Join or Become a Member Now button, and join us. It's only $30 for the year using the code POD10. You will help us continue our important work of education, research, and activism. And welcome to the family. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me, Hilda.
This topic is so important because anybody can fall for the Botox lie. I am so surprised, honestly, Megan, that you were a Weston A. Price Foundation chapter leader, crunchy by your own description and admission, and somehow still you decided to get Botox. How is that?
That's exactly right, Hilda. It's a little embarrassing, but you're right. I was a chapter leader out here in California. I have been eating the Weston A. Price way for years. I filter my water. I've read all of Dr. Cowan's books, and even I fell for the Botox lie. And, it is so seductive. What happened was I decided to try a tiny little bit of cosmetic Botox last year. And, I had done some cursory research online and everything seemed to tell me, there's no possibility that this could cause adverse health effects. You'll be totally fine, especially with a small amount. And I had friends who had tried it, my sister and, all of that. So I go to a doctor that I've been seeing for over 2 years. I really trust her. And what ended up happening was immediately upon injection, I began to have very strange neurological symptoms. And I'm sitting there in the chair. I have head pressure, difficulty concentrating. My brain just starts feeling very off. And I tell the doctor, I don't feel well. It almost felt like I was coming down with a flu. And, she just kind of ignored me. I went home. Well, it turns out I started developing all of these other symptoms: dizziness, nausea, brain fog. I could barely care for my children at home. And this ended up developing in the ensuing days and weeks into full-blown botulism.
But Megan, thousands and thousands of people have had Botox injections and not had the side effects you're describing. So, how can you be sure that what you experienced was some kind of poisoning from botulism?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that I'm sure a lot of people have asked themselves. And what ended up happening after this happened to me is I really needed to figure out what was going on with my body. I was unable to work and care for my children. And so I started digging into the clinical trials for these drugs. And what I found out was that over 30 years ago, these companies had been conducting clinical trials for their drug and reporting that as many as 1 to 10% or more of patients in their trials were experiencing botulism symptoms in the days and weeks after injections. And, of course, they never say the B word in their clinical trials, but, they just report what they are. But I want to read for people. This is according to the Mayo Clinic.
Uh-huh.
What are the signs and symptoms of foodborne botulism? And so on their website, you'll see the following symptoms: trouble swallowing or speaking, dry mouth, muscle weakness, blurry vision, trouble breathing, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Well, so then I go to the clinical trials for Botox. And
Yeah.
initially, Botox was used for eye spasms and neck spasms. And because it does paralyze our muscles. And we can get into that when I tell you more about how the toxin works. So, according to their initial clinical trial, this was in the early 1990s, the most frequently reported adverse reactions were difficulty swallowing, neck pain and headache, and other events reported in 2 to 10% of patients include increased cough, flu syndrome, dizziness, muscle weakness, oral dryness, speech disorder, fever, nausea, drowsiness. And then it goes on to say that blurry vision and difficulty breathing have also been reported. Well, where have we heard those symptoms before?
Yes. No, it's like the same exact thing. But your experience isn't what everyone else has had. How is that? Were you particularly vulnerable, or as the esthetician's assistant said, like, did you have allergies or something?
Right. I was told that's exactly right. So 2 days after my symptoms had started, I called the doctor's office back and was told I had allergies. Well, of course, that wasn't true. I'd never had allergies in my life. And what I've come to realize after all the research I've done and digging into these big meta analyses, talking to other people who have had what I had, is that there's actually quite a few people out there walking around with botulism, like probably in the near close to tens of thousands of people, and they're not realizing it. And one of the reasons that is because their injecting doctor or nurse may not even know what these symptoms are and that they are possible after Botox. So let's imagine patients aren't being told about these possible symptoms, and then maybe they don't experience them until their fifth time, until their 10th time, until their 15th time, even with Botox. Why would someone correlate hair loss or dry mouth or, even nerve pain or things like fatigue and brain fog back to their Botox if they've never been told that those symptoms are possible and they maybe don't get them the first time?
Right, right. It's likely that they don't at all. I get that. So let's back up because I know you've done so much research on this since your experience and you're big on getting the word out. Let's talk about the history. How is it that this toxin is being injected for cosmetic purposes?
That's exactly right. I mean, that was my question after I developed these awful debilitating side effects. I said, "How is this drug legal?" So what ended up happening is I met a researcher who wrote an amazing book called Recognizing Botulism right here. And her and I contacted her and we started having weekly phone conversations. And she had been studying botulism of all kinds, foodborne and iatrogenic, which is what they call botulism after these injections. She'd been studying this for over 18 years, and she started describing the history of Allergan and the history of this botulinum toxin drug to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, someone needs to write a book about this. So it turns out that our military was originally doing research on this toxin to figure out how to use it against our enemies, to figure out how to kill people. They were trying to aerosolize it. And our military in the 40s, 1920s through the 1940s, are actually where a lot of the good research about this toxin came from, because they were showing that they were injecting it into animals, in one leg, and it was showing up systemically in the blood. They were finding it in the brains of these animals. They were finding it in, the opposite limbs. And they also developed a vaccine against the toxin, and they developed the antitoxin, which is currently the only known treatment for botulism. So what happened was this one guy, Dr. Shantz, stole a vial of the toxin from our military in Maryland when President Nixon disbanded the research. He brought it home with him to Wisconsin, where he started a new job in their biology lab at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And he is the guy who began experimenting on this toxin for medical purposes, sent it out to Dr. Scott out here in California, who was the first guy to use it on eye spasms. And do you remember him?
Yes, I do. I remember you're telling me about this. And so now I'm reviewing it also because the fact that I've read both of your books, Me Talks Pretty and Notox. The idea is it was originally considered, or it was being investigated for military purposes in war. And then they decided, it could have a value in terms of helping people prevent these spasms in the eye, or like you said, in the neck. And then I guess someone realized, wait, we could use this to paralyze muscles so that they don't create wrinkles on the skin.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And Dr. Scott was the first one to use it for eye spasms. And what I found out in my research was that this guy, he was kind of a hot mess when it came to doing research. He was not a researcher by trade. He didn't understand that, studies need placebo groups as well as treatment groups. His research was all over the place. And here's the kicker. In order to fund his initial drug trials and his first company, he had to put up a second mortgage on his home, on his Marin County, California home. Mm. And so when you think about what kind of incentive this guy had to ensure that this drug looked good on paper and, wasn't at all causing these horrific side effects in at least, 1 to 5% of patients. So that was this guy, Dr. Scott. And then another woman named Jean Carruthers was actually the woman who first noticed that when she was using the toxin on her patients, it was paralyzing their facial muscles as well. And so she's kind of the grandmother of cosmetic Botox.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, why aren't people today aware of these consequences? As a matter of fact, do people even know that it is the toxin that can lead to botulism that's being injected into them? Did you get to see an insert when you had the procedure?
Absolutely not. And oftentimes, nowadays we have all these things called med spas where these people are just showing up and maybe just getting injected by an esthetician or a nurse. It's not even a doctor. The women that I've spoken to that have had these reactions were not receiving full informed consent. No one is telling us that it turns out, at least every year, the FDA gets reports of a couple thousand people having serious adverse reactions to these drugs. Hilda, last year in 2024, 777 people were reportedly dying after their Botox treatment to the FDA. That's how many reports the FDA received. Over 770 reports. You don't see any news articles about this. You do not see this in the media. What you often see on Google when you do research about Botox side effects is, don't worry about it. They're very minimal. They go away. So that's what I thought when I was heading into my injections. If I get a side effect, it'll be very minimal. Well, it turns out that that's absolutely not the case when this toxin goes systemic. And if you'll allow me, let me really quickly explain what is this toxin doing in our bodies? Because, of course, that's not included in your med spa consultation.
No, and before you dive into that, Megan, let me just say that number you quoted, 777 people dying as a result of these procedures, are the reported cases that we know about where someone linked the two, this cosmetic procedure and death. It reminds me of the vaccine adverse event reporting system because it's so underreported. When a child passes away suddenly, we call it sudden infant death syndrome, or, some other reason is attached to it when actually it may have had something to do with the vaccine. So that number is probably on the low side and not representative of the total number of people impacted by this toxin.
You're exactly right. And even a 2012 meta-analysis on pharmacovigilance reporting systems like FAIR. So FAIRS is the one for all drugs, and then VAERS is the one for vaccines. A meta-analysis found that these reporting systems only get about 2 to 10% at the most of actual adverse events that are occurring. So when you look at those numbers, you can multiply them by at least 10 in order to figure out, what's really going on in the real world. And so what's going on with this toxin is that when it comes into our bodies, whether we ingest it through foodborne botulism or whether it's injected with these drugs, the toxin is capable of attaching to nerve synapses. And what it does when it's in there is it's blocking the release of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are those chemical messengers that our nervous system uses to communicate amongst cells and tell the cells, hey, it's time to get going. It's time to move that muscle, is what's going on when the nerves meet up with the muscle. So what the toxin does is it's blocking those neurotransmitters, most notably acetylcholine, but it's also capable of blocking other neurotransmitters once it enters our brain. And the toxin can spread really one of three ways. What happened in my case was, bam, I just got hit right in a blood vessel. And the reason I know that is I had immediate symptoms, and it's nearly impossible to get immediate symptoms with a muscular injection. The other way the toxin can spread is it can actually diffuse through muscle tissue. And so what we'll see in the case of people who get Botox for neck spasms, they are at an incredibly high rate. Like we're talking 15 to more than 40% of them will have difficulty swallowing because the toxin can actually diffuse to those muscles that are involved in your airway and your pharynx. And the last way the toxin can spread is it can actually hop back along nerve cells, getting into our central nervous systems through a process called retrograde axonal transport. And scientists, what's so interesting about this, Hilda, is the research on this toxin. When you look at the scientists who are researching this toxin, it is painting an entirely different picture from what you'll read at, an aesthetic salon, or even with a neurologist who's injecting his patients for migraines or muscle spasm and different things like that. The scientific research is telling us this toxin is incredibly lethal. In fact, it's the most lethal poison on the planet. It has the ability to spread throughout our body. The early military research shows that, and updated research has shown that as well. And I don't know if it's that doctors just aren't privy to this research, if they don't know how to look for it, but they are being trained by pharmaceutical reps in order to administer this drug, and they are not being told the full story.
So even the people administering it are not being told the whole story.
That's exactly right. I mean, so what ended up happening after I got sick is I joined a very large support group for people who had been injured by these drugs. Every single one of us had the same story, Hilda. We had all developed these horrific set of symptoms in the days and weeks after our injections. Every single one of us had had a doctor who had either completely ignored our symptoms, told us, no, none of that's possible from Botox. Or like in the case of mine, she just said, oh, well, that's incredibly rare. And that's all she said to me. She had no advice on, what to do about it, or how long is this going to last? How long am I going to be on my couch, unable to care for my young children and unable to work? The reality is that no one knows the answers to these questions because there simply has never been long-term research done on iatrogenic botulism cases.
Coming up, Megan explains what recourse there is for those who have been injured and why she considers Botox basically a game of Russian roulette with your health.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Gray Toad Tallow. At Gray Toad Tallow, they believe that truly nourishing skin begins with the finest ingredients. That's why their top priority is to source only the best 100% pastured tallow from organically raised animals. The result is a clean product with just a few ingredients, reminiscent of what past generations relied on for healthy skin. At Grey Toad Tallow, they also want to keep their wholesome products affordable, making it more accessible for those who are really seeking natural skincare solutions. And they know that life is busy. That's why they want to invite you to let them do the work for you, transforming their suet into a tallow balm that your skin will love. Cherished for generations, tallow naturally offers a perfect blend of fats and vitamins to keep your skin healthy, hydrated, and radiant. Visit greytoadtallow.com today to explore their full range of products designed to nurture your skin from head to toe. And use the code WISE10 when you get there at checkout to save 10% on your order. Again, that's greytoadtallow.com and the code WISE10 at checkout to save 10% on your order. And experience the difference that Grey Toad Tallow can make. One Earth Health. Are you feeling run down? Struggling with focus, joint pain, or maybe a weak immune system? You might be missing something crucial: real, nutrient-dense organ meats. That's where One Earth Health comes in. Their 100% New Zealand grass-fed beef organs are the most potent you'll find anywhere. Why? Because New Zealand has the highest farming standards in the world, producing organ meats with superior vitamins and minerals. It's the best. And one of One Earth Health customers had this to say about how she felt. Her joints felt stronger. She could climb stairs with ease again. And her husband, he had better digestion. And her son, he finally had the focus to power through his homework. This is the power of One Earth Health products. If you want more energy, stronger joints, and a sharper focus, give One Earth Health beef organs a try. Go to oneearthhealth.com. And for a limited time, use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order. Again, that's oneearthhealth.com. For a limited time, you can use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order. Fuel your body the way nature intended. One Earth Health, because quality matters. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
So, what recourse do people have if they do believe they have been injured? Has this come to any courts?
Indeed, it has. And most of the lawsuits that took place happened before the black box warning went into place. So in 2009, the black box warning went up on these drugs that alerted doctors and patients, by the way, this toxin can spread throughout your body and cause botulism symptoms. So prior to that, of course, because Botox was approved in 1989, it had been being used for 20 years. So prior to that, there was the first person to successfully sue Allergan, the makers of Botox, was Charlotte Helton, and she was an OBGYN. She was a doctor, and she got Cosmetic Botox, 50 units, developed severe botulism in the 2 days after her injections. And she knew immediately what was going on, or she had her suspicions. And she met with doctor after doctor after doctor. You know, she had friends. All of them are just sitting there confused, like, well, you can't get botulism from Botox, so of course it couldn't be that. And of course, that's exactly what she had. She spent years recovering. Years. And this is what people really need to know about these drugs, is they are Russian roulette, and they can take years to recover from if you get horrific injuries. And she went on to sue this company, Allergan, and she did win. And throughout that trial process, I mean, it was just like a Pandora's box of evidence against this company was opened, because it turned out that back in the early 90s, they had conducted studies on monkeys showing that half of these monkeys were dying of botulism after being injected with their product. I mean, it was just horrific. They also uncovered a document that Allergan had basically paid a third party to go through cases of botulism that had been reported to Allergan from patients. And they paid this company to go through and delete and say that these cases had not been caused by their drug, and tried to get that number from like 200. It was somewhere around 207 down to 26. So, I mean, the court cases were amazing because through the, discovery process, we were able to see what kind of companies what kind of people are really behind these companies. And it was not a pretty picture.
No. And I think I read in one of your books, like, didn't one of the doctors even say from the stand, perhaps in a court case, something about how, yes, these are symptoms of botulism, but he refused to admit that botulism caused the symptoms that the patient had, or the plaintiff?
Yeah, that was Mitchell Bryn. He was the vice president at the time. And in a deposition video, he is seen saying Botox does not cause botulism. And then the lawyer says back to him, but you would agree that you can get the signs and symptoms of botulism from Botox. And then he has to concede because, of course, he's on the stand. So he says, well, it's theoretical, possible that you can get some. Unfortunately, these, manufacturers are in a pickle because they do know that their product is causing botulism. It's now, in 2025, it's now written all over the product insert. There's 4 pages dedicated to it at the end of the product insert that say this product can and does cause botulism. What people don't understand about this, though, Hilda, and what I didn't understand, is it says, if you develop any of these symptoms, go run to your nearest hospital and get medical treatment. Well, it turns out there's no treatment for these symptoms. There is one, there's antitoxin, which was developed in the 20s. And this product only works to stop further damage from occurring. It does not reverse any damage that has already occurred. And what's happening in iatrogenic botulism is a lot of times people don't realize that they are having these symptoms until it's too late, until they get really bad. So they might be 2 or 3 weeks out from their injections. Then they're rushing to the ER like I was. Well, it's too late. It's too late for the antitoxin.
So if there's no treatment, Megan, how is it that you have energy that you didn't have before? How is it that you're not having difficulty swallowing and you can actually eat again? Like, I know you went through the ringer because I've read both of your books, but how is it that people do recover? Because people must.
Yes. So the toxin itself causes permanent damage to the nerve synapses that it reaches. However, our bodies are truly amazing, as you know, and they begin to regrow new nerve synapses around the permanently damaged ones. So our bodies will start to have these little new pathways for neurotransmitters to communicate. And this can take a while. What it really depends on is how severe your case of botulism was. That's at least our best guess, because of course, no one's doing research on people like us. So Hilda, I was so lucky. I had 12 units once. And for people who aren't familiar with Botox, 12 units is about a third the amount that someone might be getting for cosmetic purposes. And it's really about a tenth the amount someone would be getting for something like a therapeutic reason, like a migraine or a muscle spasm. So I am so incredibly lucky. I had a very small amount, and most of my symptoms remediated within about 3 months. I did have a lingering ear nerve damage that took, honestly, I still have issues with it. So I'm almost 9 months out. And I do still get some fatigue. The brain fog has gone away. That's why I've been able to write 2 books, and I'm working on my 3rd. So what I learned, though, from just meeting hundreds, I hear from people all over the world who have been injured by these products. And there are cases that are much more severe than mine that can result in permanent damage. And of course, scientists don't understand why this is, right? Because no one is doing the research. And it really just comes down to how severe your botulism is, how healthy you are going into it. I was so lucky I had the Weston A. Price Foundation, and knew how to take care of myself, knew how to eat well. I had never had a single medical condition before. So I am one of the most mild cases of botulism. And it still, set me back and disabled me for a good 6 months. So what I tell people is this drug, whether you're getting it cosmetically, therapeutically, it is like playing Russian roulette because you never ever know. You can look at, what your risk might be 0.1% or 1% or 2%. You can look at those numbers all day. At the end of the day, if you get injected accidentally into a blood vessel, you're going to experience some sort of disabling disease.
What's coming to my mind right now, Megan, is that there are so many young people who are undergoing cosmetic procedures because they are being told you need to look like this filter on Instagram or Snapchat, or they're perceiving that anyway and trying to get ahead of the curve. Like, let me stop the 11s from showing up between my eyebrows while I'm still young and no one will notice that I've had this procedure. And I'm afraid they're not reading the black box warning. What hope do they have of avoiding the sickness and the issues that so many have encountered?
Well, they need to not do the drug. That's step one. In an ideal world, everyone would be sitting down and reading through the clinical trial data and reading through these package inserts before they receive these products. Here's the reality. The majority of people won't experience adverse effects on their first, second, third go at it, right? And the odds are in your favor to not be experiencing overt signs and symptoms of botulism. But again, it's Russian roulette. You never, ever know when you're going to be the next person. And look at me, I had 12 units. This is probably one of the smallest amount that's ever been reported to the FDA as having caused botulism. But here I was disabled. And, I want women to know that beauty is truly an inside job. And by that, I mean multiple things. First of all, your skin is a reflection of your health, of your whole body health, right? And how well you're eating, how well you're sleeping, are you exercising? This is how we get our skin to look good. Okay. And then the other thing I mean by beauty is an inside job is, of course, that at the end of the day, no one else is looking at your wrinkles. People don't remember you for the lines you have on your face. People remember you for how you make them feel. And, what type of a person are you? And, really how you come across in conversation. And there's just so much more to beauty than these silly little lines. And I just want people to know that these companies have really done a great job convincing, multiple generations of women that we aren't worthy if our skins aren't perfectly, smooth. And it's so insidious and it's so awful.
Some of the most beautiful people I've ever encountered, their faces were telling stories. Those lines were telling stories. We've been sold a lie, being told that those lines are ugly when they're actually a reflection of the beautiful life we've lived. Like if people say, I want crow's feet from my smiles. I want all the things because it shows who I am. I don't need to hide that from the world. It's so sad that we do. But I'm thinking, are there people, Megan, who go in for a procedure well aware that they're playing Russian roulette and yet willing to take that risk?
My goal is that hopefully in the future, everyone understands these risks. And that's why I am, being so loud about this topic, because if someone still chooses to take the risk, that is absolutely their right. And I don't plan on stopping them. But I think what I want every person to know out there is, and this goes for everyone, we're not just talking about cosmetic, because the truth is that with these large therapeutic doses for things like migraines and muscle spasms, you actually do have a much higher risk of developing botulism because you're getting such a large amount of units. And what I want people to know is I just want them to know that botulism is a horrific nervous system disease that can affect both our peripheral nerves and our central nervous system, our brains, you guys. This is not something we want to be messing with. And it's been shown time and time again that these symptoms can be incredibly long lasting. We know this through the foodborne botulism research, because of course, again, no research has been done on iatrogenic botulism, but we know that these symptoms can last years. And I just want people to consider, is it worth having a few less lines, or even is it worth, having 2 less days of migraines? Because believe it or not, that's the results of the migraine Botox clinical trials, is people got 2 less days of migraines per
No.
month.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
And I'm thinking, okay, or, maybe we can get to the root cause of these migraines and really figure out what's going
Yeah.
on with them, rather than playing this game of, I don't know if my injector is going to ruin my life today,
Wow.
because it can absolutely ruin your life. And there is no plan B. There is no, oh, I'll just go to the hospital and they'll make everything right. Absolutely not. I went to the ER 7 times, Hilda. Not a single doctor knew what was wrong with me or could help me.
Oh my gosh. And Megan, you were a successful speech pathologist. You had young children at home. You were firing on all cylinders, really, right? And then this set you back in a way that you realized, okay, I just really messed with my life. And that's why you're so passionate about this. Do you ever feel like you're the lone voice out there? Like, who's come alongside you to bring awareness to the fact that Botox leads to botulism?
Oh, there are tons of people out there that are starting to talk about this. There's a great organization called Talk Safety. Their website, I believe, is talksafety.com. They've been talking about this for years. That was the support group that I joined and started to learn, read all these stories of other people that had been through exactly what I'd been through. There are a few figures on Instagram, but it has yet to reach the mainstream. And I think this really has to do with, well, who the heck is paying for all the commercials during your Super Bowl? Surprise, it's Botox.
Oh,
Everyone has seen the Botox commercials on the TV, and it just, it makes me wonder what's really going on here, and why is the news not reporting on people like us when you look at the database, the FDA database, and you're seeing horrific numbers of permanent disability and death from these shots. And this is not new. This has been happening for over 30 years.
what is your objective? I know you said you want to inform people, you want to stop them before they even go in to get the procedure. Do you hope that this will be disapproved by the FDA so that it will be taken off the market altogether?
Well, it's my opinion that this drug should not be used cosmetically at all. Again, I believe in freedom at my core. I do believe, but what I think's going on is that people are not being adequately informed. So they might, have page 49 of their product insert say, by the way, people could get botulism from our drug, but that to me is not adequately informing people of the very real risk of the life altering injuries that can come from these drugs. So ultimately, I think that Botox for sure is going to remain legal, but I hope that I can build, through writing my books and through speaking on podcasts like this, I hope that this movement can build enough awareness into the mainstream so that people can really see what they're risking when they take them. And Hilda, I bet your audience does not do Botox, or not many of them, but I'm willing to bet that they have family members, friends, or coworkers who have either taken these drugs or been offered them from their doctors. So I think it would be so important for your listeners to take the knowledge that they've gained in this episode and start to spread the word in their communities.
And Megan, what do you say to the skeptic who's like, oh, I've already been in several times. Look at my skin. It's flawless. Like, you're just an alarmist.
Well, let me tell them about the hundreds of women I have spoken to who had not a single side effect until their 10th, 20th injection, and now are going on 2 or 3 years of living with botulism symptoms. They cannot work. They cannot care for their children anymore. Sadly, some of these people are incredibly, incredibly depressed and even suicidal in some cases. And I want to be really honest about that, because this drug really has ruined lives when people least expect it, right? They've gone in multiple times. They trust their injector. Why would their injector lie to them? And they just end up with these horrific adverse effects.
Yeah. And I think I've heard you say before too, not just the Russian roulette analogy, but that it's basically like a time bomb. And that sooner or later, if you continue to inject your body with a toxin, it will have an effect.
Your body does not like to be poisoned. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. I mean, come on. We know this. We know this at our core. And that's why, that's why I say it's embarrassing that I fell for the Botox lie, because at my core, I knew that injecting a toxin, the most lethal toxin on the planet, into my body was not a great idea, Hilda. And, I'm living with the repercussions of that, but I am trying to take my lemons, turn them into that lemonade, and get the word out as best I can.
Well, Megan, we're grateful. Of course, we'll put all of your information in the episode description so people can find your books and all the ways in which you're trying to inform folks. But I want to ask you now the question I love to pose at the end. If the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, of course, I'm going to say, don't do Botox. And the follow-up to that is eat the Weston A. Price way, because I really do believe that that's what helped nurture my body through the healing process.
Wonderful, wonderful words to end on, Megan. Thank you so much on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We're grateful for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Hilda.
Our guest today was Megan McCue. You can go to her website, meganmccue.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a letter to the editor from our Spring 2025 Wise Traditions Journal. Several years ago, I had a tooth in the back of my mouth that was very loose. The pockets around it were very deep and it wobbled. My dentist recommended that I have it removed, but first he said I should see a periodontist. When I got to the periodontist, he had me sit down with a hygienist, and she showed me a rubber tip on a toothbrush and said that if I should use it once a day to massage the gums on either side of my teeth, kind of putting it in between the teeth and in front and back and move it around to massage the gums. Then she suggested I floss and brush. And this exercise only takes 2 to 3 minutes, by the way. The periodontist said that my tooth was loose because it was higher than the rest of the teeth. So every time I ate, I was basically banging down on it. So he filed it down, and back with the hygienist, she measured my pockets. Many were very deep. I also had a lot of bleeding. She gave me a rubber tip and sent me home, back home. I started using the tip every evening before I flossed and brushed. Now, when I get my teeth cleaned, my pockets are very small and there is no bleeding. Even the tooth that was loose is now quite secure. The periodontist said if I keep up with this exercise, I should be able to keep my teeth all of my life. If you go to Amazon and do a search for gum stimulator, you can find this little rubber tip along with pictures about how to use it. Well worth the effort. This is a letter from Celeste from New Hampshire. Thank you about the tip. We appreciate it, Celeste. If you have something of interest for the Wise Traditions family, please write us at info@westonaprice.org and put letter to the editor in the subject line. Talk to us about the topic of your choice. It can be some little tip you have, like Celeste's story, or something that you've learned from the podcast, or something that you have a question about. We want to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.